Hey everybody, Brett Boyd here. I want to thank you for clicking on this video. This video almost didn't happen. Some of you know that recently I interviewed author 𝗖𝗿𝘆𝘀𝗁, who is somebody that actually died for 9 whole minutes. She flatlined in the hospital and actually visited heaven. And I don't say that lightly. There's lots of stories, lots of claims out there that people make, but this woman is the real deal. She's a school teacher, and she still is actually. She didn't go off looking for fame after her experience. She's still a school teacher, and one of the most humble people I know. And her story is incredible. And so I interviewed her on my Facebook program, Facebook on Fire, just the other day. And I'll tell you something, every power that could be that's out there tried to come against us making that happen. During the broadcast, people told me that it looked like someone was shaking the camera. And of course, on my end, as I'm watching the interview transpire, it looked clear, it sounded great. And when I went to post the video at the end, it's like Facebook couldn't recognize the video. It wouldn't load the video. So people could not watch the playback of her story. And that really bothered me because she explains her experience so beautifully, and people need to hear about the hope of heaven. So that's what this video is. It's actually just the audio of her interview. So you're just going to see a screenshot of the 2 books that she wrote regarding her experience and what dying taught her about living. So stay tuned. You're going to get the whole interview, the audio from my interview with author 𝗖𝗿𝘆𝘀𝗁. So we're going to get into the interview right now. I hope you enjoy and share with friends and family. So I'm so honored that you accepted my invitation. And I know people are just going to be so blessed by what you're sharing today. And I know it's like, so we've never actually met or anything. We're just Facebook friends. But for those that don't know, and you may not know, I know I did send you a message a while ago, but I'm sure you get lots of messages from people. But so I was a drug addict for 8 years, and it was really, really rough. And I was actually at such a terrible point in my life. I was actually living in a halfway house, and it was like really bad. And I remember we used to go on like walks and just kind of venture into town, and there was really not much to do with our time. So I was in a Target, and I was just browsing the book section, and I'm not a reader. Other than the Bible, I don't really read books. And I saw the title, Waking Up in Heaven. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And I opened it up, and I'm telling you, I sat down for 3 hours and couldn't put it down. Oh, wow. And it captured my heart. And, you know, as you I'm sure know, there's lots of people out there that claim to have certain experiences. And, you know, sometimes they don't resonate as being entirely true. And from the page 1 of your book, I knew you were the real deal, and I knew that I needed to read the whole thing. I promise you. And ever since then, even throughout the rest of the addiction time, that was the one book that I would always say to people that were struggling with anything to do with God. I said, you have to get this book. It will just change how you look at God and the hope of heaven. So, yeah. So it changed my outlook on even how I look at God and how I look at love. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Oh, you're going to start me crying. I'm going to try and see if I can't get this phone to maybe set by itself. Oh, there we go. Okay.
There you go. Cool. Cool.
Well, thank you for sharing. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, well, I'm sure lots of other people have similar stories, and that's the power of books. You know, you can reach so many more people that you can't reach face to face. And that's why I love what's going on now, especially with Facebook. A lot of people are utilizing that to get messages across. And I think it's really cool what God can do through social media, you know?
I agree.
So for those of you that don't know 𝗖𝗿𝘆𝘀𝗁, would you just like to introduce yourself? And
Sure. My name is 𝗖𝗿𝘆𝘀𝘁𝗹. I am a wife and a mom of 4 and a school teacher in Oklahoma. In 2009, about 10 months after my twins were born, I started having trouble breathing. I went in on December 8th for a routine procedure, and I say that everything that could have gone wrong that day went wrong, or did it.
Right.
And I ended up with pancreatitis due to the procedure. I was put into the hospital for several days, and on my second day in the hospital, I died. And so, and now here we are 10 years later.
Wow.
So
That's incredible. Would you be able to sort of give like a brief account of what happened? Because I'd love for people to hear how this happened for you.
Absolutely. So the funny thing is that I could sit here and I could tell you about the time that I spent in heaven, but if you didn't know the backstory, then some of the things that happened probably wouldn't make too much sense. So I'll give you the condensed version.
Sure.
Born and raised in a small town in southwest Oklahoma. My parents divorced when I was very young. My father was absent due to the divorce. I still got to see him a couple of times a year. My mom remarried when I was very young, between the ages of 3 and 5. And around that time is also when the sexual abuse in my life began. Not at the hands of my stepfather, but it was related in that aspect. I never really spoke about that ever. But when I was 8 years old, I remember being in church, because in my town, it wasn't really like, do you go to church? It was, what church do you go to? And when I was a little girl, my mom would put me on the bus that came through the neighborhood and send me off to church. And she would ride the bus with me and drop me off, and then she would come and pick me up. And so finally she decided, okay, I'll start going too. And so that was how we began to go to church. Okay. And so at 8 years old, I remember paying attention actually and hearing them do the altar call, and the words, if you accept Jesus, then you'll be saved. And I needed to be saved from what was happening. And so I ran down there as fast as I could. And that night I was baptized, and I remember coming up out of that water and feeling so clean and so fresh and ready. But the world continued. And so when the abuse continued, I remember thinking, at just a little age, like, did I do this wrong? Did I not go into the water right? Did I not? And it's so confusing as a kid, because they say you have to accept Jesus into your heart, and you're like, how does that happen? And so I didn't really know enough to know that it was just that simple longing and desire for him that sealed it forever. And so I was baptized again a few short months later. And then by the age of 12, I was baptized 4 times in 3 different denominations, right? Because I was trying my hardest. So around the age of 12, when I was baptized the last time, and I've been dunked, I've been sprinkled, I've been, like everything. I remember just thinking, I guess like it's just not going to work for me. So really my question, I've always questioned, like, are you there? It's like that book I read when I was a kid. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. But I'm always like, it's me, Crystal. And then as a teenager, I took a wrong turn somewhere. Always looking for love, longing to be loved, and the self-esteem was a big issue. And so by the age of 20, I had a child, and I had an experience of terminating a pregnancy. And that left me completely shattered and broken. And then just another secret to add into the pile of secrets that I was carrying. The amount of shame and guilt was crippling. Wow. And also, I compiled the shame and guilt from my abuse, as a lot of children do. It was me. Something was wrong with me. It was my fault. And so I went through my 20s, and the funny thing is that I was always a talker. I always laughed. I always had a big mouth. I've always been in trouble for being too loud, saying too much. It's just who I am. Yeah. And that was who I was in my 20s, and I was a wild child. But, I got married very young. I had my second child, my daughter. And unfortunately, my first husband battled addiction. So this wasn't new to my life, because that's what I grew up in, right? And so I kind of picked somebody subconsciously that was going to emulate what I had grown up in. The difference is that by the time I was holding 2 babies in my arms, I couldn't live like that. And we struggled for years with his addiction. And so I found myself at 21 years old. Oh my gosh. And I thought I was so old. Alone, divorced with 2 kids.
Wow.
and working my way through college. So I knew one thing. I knew that I wanted to make something of my life, and I knew that I wanted my life to be used in some way, and I wanted to become a teacher. I can remember my second grade teacher hugging me every morning, Mrs. Evans, and I felt so loved in her class. She was also the first teacher that taught me how to write a story.
Wow.
And I know, so I always say Miss Evans, but I just remember feeling so loved, and I wanted other kids to have that, right?
Yeah.
So I put myself through college and graduated, and a few years later, I met and married the first Christian man I'd ever dated, and God started moving. The difference is that Virgil, he didn't have to have any proof that God was real.
Yeah.
And me, I had a lot of proof that God wasn't real.
Right? Yeah, right.
But here's the funny thing. I was the youth pastor at my church. And I wasn't sure that he was who I was talking, who I was teaching these kids about. I mean, I can remember too, sorry, I'll go off on a tangent if you don't watch me. But I can just remember coming home after teaching lessons and thinking, like, could you really be real? But here's what it was. I never had a doubt that Jesus was real. So weird.
Yeah.
I wanted him. I would strive for. I wanted his love. I wanted his acceptance. I wanted him to be real more than anything. God terrified me. Yeah. Because in church, we're taught that, God is this father figure.
Right.
Well, my father and I had to have a distance relationship. Not that we didn't have a good relationship. I have a great dad, by the way. I love my dad. Yeah. And he parented the kid he got the best he could. Yeah. But we were distant. And then my stepfather struggled with addiction because of hurts and abuse in his life. See how the generation, the curse, the generational just goes on. And so because of that perpetuated onto us. My mom ended up leaving my stepdad when I was 5 years old when he attempted to take my life one night. So she grabbed me and my brother and we left. But even though we left, the sexual abuse that was associated in that time continued. So I didn't understand this relationship with father.
Right.
So father, we were not going to be able to see each other as much as we longed for, because I longed to see my dad every day. And I'm sure my dad longed to see me every day too, right? Or you were very punishing and vengeful. And there's some of that stuff in the Bible that kind of scared me when they would talk about him.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure I wanted to know him. Terrified. So that's where I stood when I met and married Virgil.
Wow.
And then I just started questioning, well, maybe he is as good as my husband says he is. And so 5 years into our marriage, lots of little things that happened. I talk about in the book. Where God spoke, but I didn't know it was God. I call
the
him
Pizza Hut was so good.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. And that was before I even knew him,
so cool.
I don't know if you want me to tell it.
Could you
I will.
That? I love that.
So I was teaching school. My oldest daughter at the time, I think she was 11 or 12. She might have been 10. And she had gotten a free pizza. And so we went to pick up her free pizza. I ordered a Coke. And I was balancing my checkbook. For you millennials, a checkbook is a book where you write down how much money you're spending and you have to add and subtract and balance, right? Okay. I know. My little daughter asked me the other day, what is a checkbook? Okay. So I was balancing my checkbook and lo and behold, we had more money than I thought we were going to have. So I'm super excited.
Yeah.
The waitress that we had, all I did was order a Coke. She was a little bit elderly and she brought me my Coke. And all of a sudden I heard a voice, but I didn't hear anything audibly.
Right.
And it said, give her $100. And I went,
yeah.
Because one thing you needed to know about me before God, I was a very selfish person.
Okay.
I was also I'm going to get you before you can get me kind of person.
Yep.
I thought I had to tell you everything I felt and thought, good or bad. I learned since then, my girlfriend says I'm becoming an adult where I don't have to say everything that I want to say.
Yeah.
But I was a very, very selfish person. And so for this to tell me to give away money, honestly, I thought I was going crazy. And so I called my husband, told him what was happening. And I said, I think I'm going crazy. And he said, that's God and you need to give her the money.
Wow.
And so then it kept happening and I kept calling him back, and he was on his first day at a new position. And he said, listen, I can't talk, give her the money. So I left $10, and I thought that's a lot of money for a Coke, and we leave.
Right.
And as we're going out to the car, it's like following me, like I can't shake this, whatever it is. So I get into the car and it's there too. And it's like, and it said, that's not what I asked you to do. And of course I'm freaking out. I call my husband again, and he said, listen, I don't go get the money from the ATM. Don't call me again.
Right.
So what happens is I go get the money from the ATM, but I talk myself in to only getting $50.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, but $50 for a flippin' Coke. And so I go back, and I told my daughter, I said, wait in the car, I'll be right back. And I'm walking through the parking lot, and it said, tell her who it's from. So now I start arguing with myself in this parking lot. So if people didn't already think I was crazy and they saw me then, it reminded me of Whoopi Goldberg in the movie Ghost. And so I argue with myself all the way in. She's getting ready to leave. I walk up, I give her the money, and I said, this is from God. Wow. And of course, she's hard of hearing. And so I had to say it louder. So I'm humiliated. I give her the money, I leave. I only told my best friend, Kara, and my husband. That was it. And my best friend, Kara, she's so loving and supportive. And we worked together. And so she would pop into my classroom and she'd say, did God tell you to give me any money? Like, she's just so supportive. Right. And 3 days later, my husband called and said, hey, I just walked into a conversation at work. They were talking about you. And I was like, what? They were talking about this lady came into Pizza Hut and gave this woman $50. And so my husband jumps in to protect me, like defend me. And the guy says, no, I was the manager that night. And her husband had just lost his job, and they were trying to get their kids home for Thanksgiving and provide Thanksgiving. And she had prayed that morning and said, God, I don't know if you're there, but if you are, could you help me make $100? And then she had only made 50 when a woman came in and ordered a Coke. So here's the thing, like in that moment, God was so real for me. I was like, holy moly, he is real.
Wow.
But the thing is looking back, he didn't ask me to give her $50. He asked me to give her 100. He didn't want to match what she had already earned. He wanted to fully answer that prayer. And I think a lot of times he's like that, and he wants to answer fully and go beyond what we expect. But either we block it, or the person he's trying to use to help bring that miracle into fruition, blocks it. Yeah. So although it was a happy story, it also taught me that had I listened to him fully and trusted fully, that I would have been a part of something much bigger. Yeah. So, but within a matter of days, that just became a coincidence. It was just a coincidence that happened. Right. So that kind of stuff, little stuff like that happened on and off. And I'm not used to doing the live. So when stuff pops up, I'm like, yeah. So we fast forward, we're 5 years into marriage. We still go to church every Sunday. We're very active in our church. And Virgil had adopted my children. And so 5 years in, I said, would you ever want a biological child? And he said, yeah. And so I could not have children any longer. And wasn't really sure I was worthy, enough. But we ended up going through the in vitro process. And I can remember before we went through the first round, I remember going into our bathroom and closing the door and just crying. Because here's the thing. For somebody who wasn't sure he was listening, I talked to him all the time. Right. And so I remember closing the door in the bathroom and just crying and praying like I had never prayed before. And I said, I know I don't deserve this, because I still carried around all of that shame from the experiences that I had as a teenager. And I said, I I don't feel worthy and I don't deserve this, but he is a good man and he is a good father and he deserves this, you know? And I said, and I'll know you're real if we get pregnant.
Wow.
And so we ended up getting pregnant, and I went back into that bathroom and cried and said, but I'll know you're real.
Yeah.
If it's twins.
Wow.
And so we found out, I think at, 2 weeks that it was twins. And so then I went back into the bathroom and cause I'm like coincidence.
Yeah,
and then
right.
we did IVF. Like the chances of having twins are high. And then I went back in and I said, well, I'll know you're real if it's a boy and a girl. We found out at 15 weeks it was a boy and a girl. Okay, so then I'm like, well, I mean, that's just, 50-50 chance. Like, you're going to have a boy or a girl. Like, there's a pretty good chance. And so I said, I'll know you're real if one has blue eyes and one has green. Now, I have green eyes, but my husband is a black man who has beautiful brown eyes. His father has brown eyes. His father has brown eyes. Brown eyes are very recessive in his family.
Yeah.
And so I knew that the chances of having a child with light eyes was there, but very remote.
Yeah.
And what I really was doing in that moment was I was giving God the big push that I knew that it wouldn't happen. Therefore, I could say, see, it's all coincidence. You're not real. So at 29 weeks, our twins were born. And so it was a very traumatic ordeal. They were born weighing just 2 pounds. It was and I can remember in that time, especially the first couple of days after they were born, they did not expect us to bring both of them home. And I can remember in that moment, just this rage erupting in me towards God. And Virgil and I quit praying on the same day. He prayed, God, your will be done. And then I prayed, if you take one of my kids, I will hate you forever. Right. And I probably had some other explicit words mixed into there. Sometimes I don't have the most sophisticated vocabulary. And so it would be 12 days before we could hold the babies. And that day I remember holding Micah, and just for a split second, he opened his eyes, and later that day Willow opened hers. And Micah has the most beautiful blue eyes I'd ever seen, and Willow's eyes were green.
Wow.
And I'm going to have pictures. I have to keep the pictures because sometimes even now I go, did that really?
Right.
Have you told the story so much that you have embellished it by accident? I have to go back and look at those pictures. Yeah. But it was true. So in that moment, that should have been all I needed to know he was real. Right. And instead, I allowed all the shame and the guilt and the anger, because really what it boiled down to was, if you're real, then where were you?
Yeah.
Why wasn't I good enough for you to save? And so I didn't know what was worse, him being real and not loving me.
Right.
Or him not being real. Right.
Wow.
And so we did about 4 months in the hospital, give or take between 3 and 4. We brought our babies home, and I returned to work, a nervous wreck with postpartum. I mean, it was just, It was an awful, awful time. And I started having trouble breathing. And so I thought, well, it has to be, maybe related to the birth of the babies. And it just progressively got worse. And I would go to the emergency room and they would say, I think it's a panic attack. And I'd say, I'm not panicking until I can't breathe. Like, I can't breathe. And then I panic. But,
right.
And so 6 months into that, they scheduled a procedure to sedate me and put me under to just make sure there was no blockages. So I went in for that on December 8th. And when they did that, the doctor nicked my pancreas, causing me to wake up with pancreatitis. Wow. They said, this is normal. You'll be in the hospital for 3 or 4 days on a pain pump, and then you'll go home. I was in a hospital about an hour away from where we lived. My husband was completely out of time off from work at this point. And so I woke up the morning of December 10th by myself and violently sick. And I can remember the nurse that I had that day. She tried to help me a little bit. And I called my mom and I said, you've got to come and be with me today. She said, well, I'm trying to do my hair. I'm trying to get ready. And I said, well, I'm dying. I said, I'm dying. I'm going to die. And she's like, oh, stop being dramatic. I'll be there in a little bit. So I always say, like, after all this happened, and I was able to talk, I said, I told you.
Yeah.
I told you I didn't feel good. I told you something.
Right.
But so she showed up that day, and I remember every moment. I remember she brought my favorite lotion. And you have to understand, too, is like, my mom is such an amazing person, but she had to raise a child who had endured so much that she had no idea about.
Right.
And God bless her. She calls me all the time sometimes, and she'll go, I'm so sorry. And I said, Mom, it's okay. Would you have stopped it had you have known? Absolutely. Then okay,
Yeah, right.
And so at this point, she didn't know. But we had a tumultuous relationship because I was so incredibly broken and strong-willed and rebellious. I mean, I was the teenager that was dabbling in everything you should not dabble in. I had no self-worth. And so when you don't feel like you're worth anything, you act like you aren't worth anything.
Yeah.
And I was very confrontational with my mom. And so we had just had a very tumultuous relationship. And so for her to be the one that was there with me that day has always been so sweet for me. And she brought my favorite lotion, and she cleaned me up because I had been sick. And what was so funny was, she did all this not knowing that in a way she was preparing my body.
Wow.
And so she cleaned me and she lotioned me, and I remember her lotioning my hands and my feet. And it was almost like I was a little child again.
Wow.
And then I remember saying, I've got to take this medicine. The pain was so excruciating. And so I took the medicine from the pain pump, and it would drift me off. And then I remember waking up and seeing her in the bathroom, like doing her hair or her makeup or something. And then I fell back asleep, and then I woke up, and this time was different. When I opened my eyes, it was almost like I just knew. And I opened my eyes, and she was sitting at the foot of my bed with her back towards me. And this understanding just washed over me.
Right.
I knew my heart had stopped.
Wow.
I knew I wasn't breathing. And I knew that I was leaving. I don't know how else to explain it other than there was no fear. There was a peace that just washed over me. And with the last little breath I had, in my chest, I said, I love you. And then I closed my eyes and woke up in heaven.
Wow.
So, got to know the backstory.
That's great.
So what I remember experiencing was immediately standing in the most beautiful tunnel of light that had no beginning, no end. It was so gorgeous. And I can remember knowing several things all at once. I knew where I was, and I felt like I had returned, right?
Wow.
Like that I was returning to my origin. I knew where I was. I knew who I was, which is such a huge deal because that was the first time I'd ever really met myself without all of the negativity of human life and my human experience attached to me. Yeah. There was no negativity in this realm. And so only the most perfect version of my spirit was standing there. Wow. So I was still me. Yeah. I was still the crystal that had experienced that life and had died. But I had a realization that I was back to the real me and the me that had existed. And I say this in the book, and several people have been confused, but I said I was the me that had existed for all of eternity. Yeah. So the reason I say that is because eternity cannot be measured. There is no beginning. There's no end. Yeah. And I was created in my spirit before I became a human. And I had never read the Bible. So I said that, and a couple of people came at me and said, you're lying. That's not of God. And I thought, I better read this Bible. Oh my gosh, what if what I experienced? And I've had several people say, what you experienced was demonic. And I thought, well, then he got it wrong because this experience changed me. But I started reading in the Bible, and there is a verse that says, for I knew you before I knitted you in your mother's womb. So that's how I explain who I was in that moment. I was the before I was knitted into my mother's womb, right? And so, and then I had two angels that were standing in front of me and to my left. I recognized them immediately. They recognized me. They were very excited that I could see them and that I could hear them. And I knew that they had been with me this entire journey, but yet I had just never even known that they were there. So they were excited to like, she hears us, she sees us. You know, she knows like we've been here the whole time. And I knew that I loved them. And so this is the other thing is I knew that I had loved them before my journey here, that they were just specifically for me. So I call them guardian angels because I feel like when my spirit came to earth in human form, when God knitted me into that womb, that these angels were assigned to watch over me. And then lo and behold, there's a scripture that says, and I will give my angels command to watch over you. I'm paraphrasing, but so it really is real. And then what I noticed about the angels was that the one to the left was taller than the one to the right, and he was bigger. And I say he, not that I really know that we have male, you know, female, male, whatever. But I call them he and she, and I actually call them Maria and Francisco. And I have no idea why I do that. I'll probably get to heaven and they'll be like, I'm George, and this is this is Kate, but whatever. But he was massive, massive. And she was more petite. But I do remember just the light that was radiating off of them. I did not see big wings. I didn't see, what I saw was a human-like silhouette. It would be as if you were looking at a light bulb and the light was on. You can see the silhouette of the light, but you can't actually see inside. And what I came to realize was that the light that was reflecting off of them was the light of God, right? Because everything there was reflecting the tunnel, the angels, everything was reflecting of him. And so we began to talk immediately. Go figure. But man, you talk without words. It was a communication like will never experience here. It was done through emotion, through thought, through memory. It would be as if you and I could look at each other, and like that, I would know every thought, every emotion, every memory, every word you've said, every day, minute, second of your life, like that. So the understanding, like the knowing that you have is just so incredible. And so I just remember us talking and being excited. And then I became aware of a presence that was there the whole time, but I had just become aware. And I turned to face this presence. And when I did, I couldn't even stand. Like, what I saw was a beautiful presence of light. And I know people want me to be able to explain it so much differently and better. Human words just stink to describe. John Burke, he said, it's like you're trying to describe a three-dimensional experience in a two-dimensional, with only two-dimensional world tools. And so I say light, and people are like, light? That's all he is? He's just a light? And I was like, oh no, he's like, he's a light you can feel and breathe and experience. And so I turned and I knew instantly that this was the presence of God. And I tell people, like, I didn't meet him. I recognized him. I mean, I just recognized the entity that created me. I mean, crazy. And I can remember falling to my knees and putting my hands up. And we, at this time, you know, I was raised Baptist, Catholic and Baptist. And then at this time we were Methodist. And so in any of those denominations, this was not something I had ever done my whole life. In fact, I can remember being in church, and if they played more than 3 songs, I was like, done, you know, like, or I would just sit there and go, oh, how many more do we have to do? So worship was never something I understood. And I fell to my knees and I put my hands up to worship him. And then in pure reverence and awe, I didn't even feel like standing on my knees was good enough. And I just went straight down to my face. It was not out of a fear. It was not out of anything other than a pure reverence for this beautiful being that was gracing me, with this time. And I can remember several things. All my life, I thought, okay, if God's real, I got a couple questions.
Yeah.
Because if he's going to throw me out, he's going to throw me out kicking and screaming.
Yeah,
and I want
right.
some answers while he's throwing me out.
Yeah.
Remember, that's kind of how I viewed God.
Yeah.
So I was going to let him know exactly what I thought and felt, on my way out. Mm-hmm. And so I remember raising my hands to him and I called out, "Why?"
Wow.
And then I said, "Why didn't I do more for you?"
Wow.
So it wasn't, "Why did you let that happen to me? Why are you silent? Why do you not stop bad things from happening?" Because all of that was downloaded into my spirit instantly. It was like there was no questions. There was no no wondering.
Wow.
And instead I said, "Why didn't I do more for you?" Because we are given so little time here. And in my spirit form, I knew that I could have done just so much more.
Wow.
And I don't really remember him giving me an answer. The communication was the same as it was with the angels. The entire time God was communicating with me, I was communicating with him. And I only remember a little bit. And then I remember at one point, and his light was all over me. Tangibly, he wrapped himself around me as I laid there and worshiped. Oh. But I remember feeling like I couldn't get close enough, like I couldn't get enough. Yeah. And I reached my hand out to try to get closer to this light and to pull it, onto me more. Almost like I was reaching for his cloak, and then I read that Bible story where she falls and she's just like, if I could just touch the hem, if I could just touch the hem. That's how I felt in that moment. If I could just touch the hem. And I said in that moment, I could worship you for all of eternity. That's how much I loved him in that moment. So it was, sorry, my microphone. It was quite evident that I loved him. Yeah. And I know he was telling me, you are loved, you are loved. I'm sorry, hold on just a second. What are you doing, buddy? Grab your snack. Pandemic momming.
Aw.
He's typical boy, him searching the kitchen, because we don't have anything to eat.
Yeah.
But I remember laying there and worshiping, and then I looked down. I call it the tunnel, but I looked down the tunnel and I just noticed at the end that there was another source of light, and I had the knowledge that was like a threshold. And I really knew what I was looking at was the entrance to heaven.
Wow.
And when I caught notice of that, he said, once we get there, you can't come back. Meaning, I knew once you cross over, that's it.
Yeah.
Guys, go watch your show. I'll be done in just a little bit, okay? They're only 10 months old when all this happened, so this is their whole life. They're like, right. I just want peanut butter and jelly, and my mom's having to talk about heaven again. So he said, once we get there, you can't come back. I knew that meant if I crossed over, that there was no returning to this life. And I said, okay, sounds good. Yeah, let's do it. And then he showed me, so immediately I said, let's go. And then he showed me a vision of my children. And kind of going, well, before you make that choice, let's look at some of these aspects that you're going to be turning away from.
Right.
And he showed me my 4 kids. They were 13, 11, and then the twins were 10 months. And he reminded me of a time when I was in church and the pastor said, we're to love God above all else.
Wow.
And I remember thinking in church, if you're real, I would never love you more than my kids.
Right.
And so I don't know why I just was able to remember that. And then he showed me several things. He showed me that if I chose to go with him, that they were going to be okay.
Yeah.
and that they were going to live beautiful lives. And
Wow.
that, and here was the thing, is that his plan for their lives was perfect.
Wow.
Just like his plan for my life was perfect. Just like his plan for your life is perfect.
Yeah.
Now, as a human, I go, this didn't feel too perfect, to me. But what he explained to me was that his perfection is not the same as our perfection, and that we will not truly come to understand his perfection until we are gathered again with him.
Yeah.
And that it did not mean that they were not going to have hardships and hard times in their life.
Right.
But he showed me that he never would leave them.
Wow.
The other thing he showed me was that I didn't have to truly leave them. That even if I continued on, that I was still going to be their mother, and I was still going to get to be in their lives.
Wow.
And that gave me comfort to know that I wasn't going to miss anything that they did. And almost in a weird way, I was going to be more involved, more in their life, and that they were going to be okay, and that I was going to see them again.
Wow.
And so I just had a complete peace. And I said, okay, I want to go with you. And so just like that, the vision of my kids was gone, and we continued towards the entrance the whole time talking. And then I saw her, this little girl playing up ahead of me. And she was so different than anything I had seen so far. I mean, my daughter likes to talk, my little daughter, she'll say, tell me about the colors you saw in heaven. And I said, well, I can't, because they don't exist here. And she goes, well, can you still see them in your mind? And I said, kind of. I said, I just know that I had never seen these colors before, and we don't have anything comparable here.
Right.
So I just remember being in awe of everything I was seeing. But then I saw her, and she was so different because she was fully human. And so she didn't have the glowing, presence like the angels did.
Right.
And she was playing, and she had on this white dress with little yellow flowers, and she had this white thing on her head, like a little bonnet. Yeah. And she was playing with this basket, almost like a little Easter basket, like a little white wicker basket. And she would dump it into the light, or she would dip it in the light, and then she would dump it out, and the light would cascade like water. It was almost like the light was playing with her. Right. And she would just throw her head back and laugh. She just thought this was the funniest thing. And I remember instantly looking at her and staking a claim and saying, she's mine. Wow. And I couldn't get to her fast enough. Like, she is mine. And I wanted to scoop her up, and I wanted to tell her how precious she was and how much I loved her, how perfect she was. And I just remember I was just trying so hard to get to her. And the whole time she's laughing. And the light around the tunnel began to prism with the flowers on her dress. Wow. And so the whole tunnel just prismed this beautiful gold from the flowers. And right before I got to her, I felt like my spirit was being blown up like a balloon. Like I just kept inflating and inflating the closer I got to her, with love and pride and joy. And like, I now understand what the term my pride and joy means. Like, she was my pride and joy. And I got to her, and right before I did, I just knew. I was like, and I actually said, I'm going to explode. I'm going to cease to exist. Wow. My spirit could not contain the amount of love I had for her. Yeah. But I still couldn't take my eyes off her. I still wanted to grab her up. Wow. And so right before that happened, it was almost as if I was wearing glasses, and God removed the way I was seeing her. And when I looked back down at her, I recognized her as me. Wow. And he said, I've tried to tell you this your whole life. And what he did in that moment was, it was one thing to tell me that he loved me. It was a whole nother. I knew that he had allowed me to see myself through his eyes. Yeah. And I tell people that if his love is represented by every grain of sand on this earth, he gave me one grain, that little bit, and my spirit couldn't contain it. And she was the age where my hurt had started. where
Yeah.
my doubt in my worth had started, where
Yeah.
my question of where are you started. And
Wow.
what he revealed in that moment, and I don't know the exact words, but I just
Right.
know that he revealed that he did not cause what happened, but that he does not interfere with the free will that he has gifted to humans.
Yeah.
That in order to answer my prayer or to stop that, he would have had to interfere with another human's free
Wow.
will. And just as I have free will, so does the person who hurt me, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, I have free will, and I've hurt people too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even after I've
Sure.
known him, I've hurt people. We're not perfect. But it made sense. But what he showed me was, although he does not stop it, he uses it all. Every single thing he uses for the greater good. Like somehow he uses it all for good.
Yeah.
And we might never know how he did it. The other thing that he reassured me was that I was never alone.
Wow.
That they were with me, during it all. And that was very comforting because I wanted to know where he was.
Yeah.
And he was there, And so just like that, she was gone. And I looked at him and the angels, and I looked at the entrance, and I was whole and complete and ready. Wow. And so we kept going, and we got very, very close to the threshold. And which I'm always kind of get sad because I've become friends with people that have had experiences or written books, and so many of them got to see like loved ones that they I had just lost my cousin that year before. That was we grew up together, so I always think, what if I would have got to see my family? What if and then people would say, I just knew that he brought you there to meet your child, and I said, no, he brought me there to meet his. I had, because I had no idea that I was his. And honestly, if I had been introduced to that child, what a horrible choice to have to choose between my 4 here or going, and it was a really hard choice. But ultimately I did choose to leave my kids and to go with him.
Right.
And so right before we got close, all of a sudden I could hear my mom crying and praying and begging. Wow. And I remember stopping, and I looked at the light, and I said, oh, she doesn't know. Like, she has no idea where I am. I need to go. She needs to know I'm okay. And I said, can I just, and I could just hear her. And my heart broke, but a part of me is like, I'm good. I'm good. And so almost like I hate to say annoyed, but I was just like, I need to get her calmed down so I can come with you. And I said, can I go tell her that I'm okay? And he said, the choice is up to you. So if you're counting, that would be 3 times that he gave me a choice. Yeah. And the first 2, I kept, nope, we're leaving. And then this time, I felt so much sorrow for her that I just wanted to say, hey, I'm good. I'm going to go to heaven. I'll see you guys later when you get, I don't know what I was going to say. But he said, the choice is up to you. And so I turned around to go find where her voice was coming from. I remember looking down because her voice was coming from underneath. And then I remember just seeing the floor of heaven. It was the most beautiful, transparent sea of diamonds I've ever seen in my life. Like these golden, so beautiful. And the moment I saw the floor, he said, tell them what you remember. And I remember like kind of being annoyed, and I just went, I remember everything. And hello. And then I said, and I'll be right back. Like I was kind of like a little bratty kid, like talking to her dad. I was like, I'll remember everything and I'll be right back. Like hold the door just a second. So I went, as soon as he said that, I woke up and I was in the hospital, and there was probably 15 doctors and nurses in the room performing CPR. Wow. The minute that I opened my eyes, I remember everything they said. I remember everything that was happening. I remember the nurse saying, we've got her. I remember looking at her, and then she was like right in my face, looking with the light in my eyes. And she said, do you know where you are? Do you know what day it is? And I went to answer, and I couldn't. I had completely forgotten how to talk. And
Wow.
it was the only time in my entire life that I've ever forgotten how to talk. But
Wow.
it's because I just was in this realm
Yeah.
where and now I was trying to remember how we formulated language as a human.
Wow.
I could not remember how to formulate language.
Oh.
And so it took me a little bit. And the first thing I said is I said, stop, because they kept trying, they were reviving me. And I said, stop. And I said, I'm in the most beautiful light. I'm with God. And my mom was, by this time they had let my mom come up, and she said, oh, Crystal, please, just keep your eyes open, stay here. And once I said, I'm with God, I closed my eyes. That's the only reason I came back, was to tell her, I'm okay. You can let me go. And I closed my eyes, and I could feel my spirit almost get out. Wow. And then they would pull me back.
Wow.
And so I would put my hand up, and I kept saying, stop. And the funny thing is that if people are doing CPR on you and you tell them to stop, they don't stop.
Right.
And I was actually really getting really mad. And then the third time when I felt pulled back, they gave me a shot of Narcan, because what had happened was my body, my pain pump was giving me too much medication. And so I had gotten a lot of medication after the surgery, and then my pain pump was set up, and it was delivering more than my body could filter. Right. So for 48 hours, every single 4 hours, my body was getting a slow overdose. Wow. And so ultimately with that last, I was on Dilaudid. And so with that last amount of Dilaudid, it sent me into respiratory arrest because my body just had too much in. And so they gave me a shot of Narcan, and which I felt no pain until that. Yeah. And it was as if a train was running through my body. And I can remember holding my arm and just gritting my teeth and thinking, why can nobody else hear this train? But it was as if I think, and I know this sounds so crazy, I think what I was hearing was the separation of my spirit coming back and being fully submerged back into my body, because it was the most horrendous thing I've ever felt. Wow. And then I was locked. And I remember just being so angry because I couldn't get out, and I didn't want to talk to any of them. I was so mad. And then my husband showed up because my mom had called him, and he drove. And he said the only thing I would say to him was, they made me come back. They made me come back. And then, I was in ICU for the next week and critical care. And but, I started telling my story right away. I would wake up and I would start trying to tell people. I told a cleaning lady that was in cleaning my room one day. I just wanted everybody to know, because I couldn't believe that I had lived so long. Right. And I just wanted to go, did you know he's real? Right. He's real. And then what ended up happening was, I can remember we went to church. We were on a committee. And it was the day I got out of the hospital. So I literally am 10 days out from this experience. Wow. All of my ribs were broken from the CPR, which that was another thing I didn't know happened, but they were cracked or broken. Wow. I was in so much pain, but I wanted to go and share what I had experienced. And our pastor, oh my gosh, our pastor George, I love him so much. And we were sitting in the committee, and he said, Crystal, will you share what you experienced? And one of the elders leaned forward and said, this isn't on the agenda. We don't have time for this. And that was the first time that I realized, oh my gosh, people might not believe me. Yeah. And then I would talk about it so much. And another person, one time just rolled her eyes, and she was like, you talk about this all the time. And I was like, oh my gosh. I didn't meet the president. I met God. But what happened was, I'm such a sensitive little person. It's really not a great attribute, but I was so afraid of what people were thinking of me that I quit sharing. And I would Virgil, I would just lay in bed at night and cry, because I was happy to be back. and to be with my kids, but I didn't choose that.
Yeah,
I felt
right.
kind of tricked.
Yeah.
I also felt
Hmm.
like this isn't where I wanted to be.
Mm.
Every day that went by, he felt farther from me and I say that because even a day or two when I was in ICU, and people will say it was the medication, but he was still communicating with me
Wow.
and I could still communicate with him.
Yeah.
But every day it got a little,
Yeah.
you know,
Different.
and
Yeah.
so, yeah, people say it was the medication and maybe it was, but,
Mm.
he showed me two visions that I talked about that actually ended up, one of them came true 30 days later and one I hope doesn't come true. And I haven't even talked about that in the book,
Okay.
but I did tell my family.
Yeah.
And so when that happened 30 days
Wow.
later, um, then that confirmed to my family. But what really
Yeah.
confirmed to Virgil was he said we were in a lawsuit with somebody who had done a business transaction with him and had just
Mm.
really messed him over. And so they had dumped a $60,000 loan in our in our lap.
Oh.
And remember, I was really selfish. And so I didn't care if we spent $61,000 in court.
Right. Right.
They were going to pay it. And so
Yeah.
we were right in the middle of a lawsuit. And when
Mm.
this happened, I said, drop it. I said, we're going to
Wow.
pay it. We're going to pay it. It'll be
Wow.
fine. And that's when he was like, okay,
Yeah.
she saw God. Like, he came home and I kind of went through, like, I call it a crazy phase.
Mm.
I remember he came home one day and he comes into the bedroom and I had all of our clothes out of the closet, maybe two shirts
Mm-hmm.
each, and everything else was in a pile. And he's like, what are you doing?
Wow.
And I said, we
Wow.
don't need all of this. I said, we're going to give this all away. And I said, we need to give our house away. Somebody
Wow.
needs this house. And he starts putting the clothes back and he goes, yeah,
Yeah.
we need the house. Like, we do.
Right. Right.
Um, and so he just had to kind of love me through some of
Yeah.
that craziness. But life began to resume to
Yeah.
normal. Um, I became braver in sharing.
Good.
And I guess it was about 3 or 4 years after I had died, I
Hmm.
was introduced to my co-author because I'd never written a book.
Right.
Um, and so, but I remember shortly, I think even being in the hospital, I remember knowing that I was supposed to tell people. And
Yeah.
I remember God saying, I'm sending somebody to help you. And
Wow.
so it was years. And I was introduced to my co-author.
Wow.
And so it was just a really awesome experience and journey. And then
Yeah.
what happens after we meet God is just as miraculous. I had to fill up an entire book
Mm.
of how he's here, in the midst of all of this. And
Yeah.
so I don't
Wow.
know. I'm sorry. I'm a rambler. I'm a talker.
No, that's incredible. And it so blesses as you're sharing, I'm trying not to cry because it's something I think we really need to pay attention to, that there is a hope of heaven
Yeah.
for us. And one thing I preach a lot is the importance of us really living Christ-like here. There's certain preachers, they always preach about one day going to heaven, but not about the
Mm-hmm.
transformation that can happen here, as us being
Mm-hmm.
children of God. And so I love to drive home that point, the importance of us actually being transformed in the here and now. But something I think sometimes we get on these extremes and then we forget, but there still is the hope of heaven, a very
Yeah.
real place. And that's why your story is just, and it's not just a story, it's an experience. It's very
Mm-hmm.
real. And I make sure to, explain that to people. This is not just some made up thing. This really
Right.
happened. And
Yeah, I would have added a lot more detail. I tell people, like, I would have maybe I would have seen Patrick Swayze if he was already there.
right, right,
It would have been a little bit more dramatic, had I
right,
made it
right.
up. But that was the thing, is that I will never stray from the details, even when there's details that others have a hard time,
Yeah,
you know, understanding or believing.
right.
And ultimately, what I tell people is I had the experience to remember what the first thing I said to God was.
Mm,
And it was, why didn't I do more?
that's so
And
important.
it is important, because what's the first thing you're going to say to God. I promise you, it's not going to be what you think it is.
Yeah.
You know, and
Right.
so that totally changed me, and it led us into, and it was hard,
Yeah.
but it led us into some ministries that I didn't even know existed. It led us into ministry with our homeless community.
Wow.
That before I would turn my head or judge, or I'm
Right.
not giving money, they're just going to waste it on alcohol. Guess
Right.
what? Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares
Yeah.
what they do with the money you give?
Right.
You're not judged based on, or it's not an experience based on what they do with it. It is your
Yeah.
experience based on, when prompted by the Spirit, do you give?
Yeah.
You know, and just seeing the beauty in other people,
Yeah.
the ministry that God led us into, you know, into the strip clubs, and
Wow.
I've met some of the most amazing human beings in those buildings. Some that I call very dear friends, and the women that formed the organization that go in and do this. And there's no expectation. They
Right.
go in
Right.
with a gift in their hand and a kind word. I'm an auntie to some of these girls' babies now.
Wow.
I get to call them best friends, and I get to watch what God does. And the thing is that it's about the relationship. It's not about trying to convince somebody to leave that lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I didn't need any church people coming into my 20s and trying to convince me to leave what I was doing, even though they could probably see that there was better for me.
Yeah.
What I needed people to show me that they loved me, even if I didn't.
Wow.
And so that is what I love about that ministry. And so, you know, I wrote another book about where is he, because I only had 10 minutes, human minutes, you know, with him in heaven.
Right.
But I've had 10 years since here on earth. And it's not always easy, because just because we're Christians doesn't mean that just because we know God is real doesn't mean that I understand.
Right.
You know,
right.
I don't understand when my friend had to bury her child. I don't understand when my best friend died and left her teenage son. You know, like, it doesn't. So I know they're okay, but I don't understand. And abuse still breaks my heart, and abortion still breaks my heart. But my heart breaks not only for that child, but for that mother. You know? So just a deeper level of compassion. Like, my heart breaks that we have people that don't feel that they're worthy of God because they've met us first as Christians. And I don't mean to say that like in a mean, malicious way. But I have people in communities that don't need our judgment. They need to know the God that created us. And if he decides to change anything, he will. And I think, me personally, he made us just the way he wanted us. So why can we not just allow people to experience him instead of giving them all of the ways he loves you, but you got to change this, and this.
Right.
How about we stop at he loves you?
Right.
And allow him to do the rest. He's big enough. You know, he's big enough. So that's just where my heart has changed, is my heart really pulls me to stand with the marginalized, with the outcasts, with the ones that are told you're not accepted. We love you, but we don't love your sin. And I disagree with that.
What would you say right now? Because I believe there are people watching right now who have found themselves in that place where maybe the only Christians they've ever known put a caveat on their relationship with God. And so what would you say to people that are watching right now that maybe have had a distorted understanding or view of who God is and what he's like? How would you speak into their life right now?
I would just say to look back at my story. When I say that he loved me and he knew everything about me, when I cried at his feet, it reminded me of the Bible story where, you know, because I read the Bible after this. But where Jesus was visiting with the Pharisee and the woman walked in, and upon seeing Jesus, she fell to his feet and wept. And she wept, and he touched her. And the Pharisee turned to the other one and said, if he only knew, like, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. If he only knew who he was touching. Like, oh my gosh. But the thing is I think she was crying harder because she knew that he did know.
Yeah.
That he did know who he was touching.
Oh.
And, you know, that girl that was laying at his feet not only had things done to her, but she had done things.
Yeah.
When you look at, let's just say, the 10 Commandments, I broke every single one of them. Every single one.
Yeah.
And yet at the moment of my death, all he did was wrap me up in love. And so it's really hard for me when we as Christians, and we use biblical we use biblical theology to say, well, these people are going to get in and these people aren't. And we just...
Yeah, I know.
I know. Can't do that. I hate to tell people, you're going to be real surprised when we get there, because he is more loving. Yeah. And here's the thing. He knows what he's doing. Right. He needs me to show love. And then I think about when the disciples were arguing about like, who's the best among us and who, like, I feel like we do that as Christians. We do. But the other thing, when they were arguing about the rules, they were arguing about, and Jesus said, listen, love God, love others. Yeah. It's that simple. Yeah. So I think we're missing the mark on that some.
That's so powerful. I was just talking not long ago about that, and how it really grieves me when I hear people, especially when it comes to suicide. Yeah. And I know, I believe anyway, deep down, Christians that will come out and say, oh, well, they're in hell, there's no question. And
I do not believe that.
Yeah, right. And I believe that God knows far more than we do, and he always will. And so we can trust him with the outcome of a person's eternity. But and I know that depending on how certain people were raised, they believe that that they should be telling people that. But like you just said, it's our job to love people. It's above our pay grade to start determining who's going where. And the whole thing is, if we don't see God as a loving father, we're going to have a distorted view on how we see other people. I think it's vital to see everything and everyone through the eyes of Christ. And we have to read the Bible to see, what is Christ like? Would he say some of the things that we say, you know? And as you just said very well, that it's usually a very different picture from how we think that he would handle something. So
and I think he has a good sense of humor too. My friend sent me a meme yesterday, and I just giggled. And it's like these kids, and Jesus is walking, and they're pointing, and Jesus said, "Okay, now where are they? What'd they say I said?" You know, right. It just reminds me. But ultimately, you know, I want people to know that he's real. And I have a lot of people ask me a question about, like, did you see Jesus? And no, I didn't, but I use the term Jesus because I intertwined them. I never understood the Trinity. It always confused me. And remember, I was raised Catholic for a little while. And so my husband finally had a perfect analogy where he said, it's like you're holding an egg, and the egg is made of 3 separate parts, but it's one egg, but each separate part contributes. And so that's what I look at. So when I say I met God, I also intertwine Jesus. Sure. But I had an interview the day my book came out, and you know, I was at, my heaviest weight. And so here's the time, you know, God wants me to step out on national TV and talk. And I had like a really bad haircut, and so we're on Fox and Friends. We're going on Fox and Friends that morning, and I just got done with my interview, and somehow like my email was linked to my phone, and all of these comments start coming in. Oh no. And then I was looking at the comments on the page, and it was, oh gosh, I still remember them all. They're so embarrassing. One said, God talks to me too. He said, put your fork down. Oh, one said, I know. One said, I can smell her hot dog breath. And I was like, I don't even eat hot dogs. Like, oh my God. Mean people, right? And then, but the ones that started getting me, one said, okay, the hot dog one my mom laughs at every time, which she can't help it. Like, I guarantee you, if she's watching this, she's laughing at that one. Aww. But the one that got me was, the guy said, I know she's lying because she couldn't fit through the gates of heaven. And I was like, I'll just have you know that in our spiritual form, we are all perfect. And so it was really, really hard. But then the comments started, if I was her kid, I would kill myself, right? So that was one of my first So then I felt like, well, golly, I don't totally belong in the Christian realm to
Yeah,
share my
right.
story. And I
Right.
don't totally belong in the secular or,
Oh,
you know, and so
yeah.
I was so confused. So I had to go on 𝗂𝗋𝘀𝗁𝐿's show that night. Well, my girlfriend
Mm,
Jennifer had gone to New York with me, and
mm,
she goes, "Shut the computer. Just she's
yeah.
not emotional. Like she's not gonna pet you.
Right.
She's like Sheldon off of Big Bang. She'll be like, there,
Uh-huh.
there, there."
Uh,
And so I was like, "I'm fine." And I went to the bathroom and I just sat on the floor and I cried. And I remember
mm,
saying, "You sent me back for this, like this
wow.
humiliation to be hurt like this." And I just
Mm,
cried and I felt God pray for them. And I was like,
wow.
no way.
Yeah.
Like, no. And then a couple more minutes. And then I had this vision, just split second in my head. And I could see Jesus standing in front of me. And he turned around and he said, "It is not you that they reject, it is me." And from that
Wow.
moment forth, and a lot of stuff has been said, but nothing hurt my feelings anymore. It's
Wow.
like he shielded. So, but I need to say also that night I went on 𝗂𝗋𝘀𝗁𝐿's show. And I don't know if you know
Mm,
who he is, but he was a political commentator.
yeah.
And I only knew the name. I didn't know anything about him.
Sure.
And so here I'd been beat up, all day.
Mm.
I go in to do his show. And right before the show starts, he looks at the book and he looks at me and he goes, "Are you going to be one of those Christians that tells me I'm going to hell?" And I just started crying, and
Oh.
I was like, "Why would anyone tell you that?" And he
Oh.
goes, like he was probably like, "Why did I get this lunatic on my show?"
Yeah, yeah.
And he said,
Oh.
he goes, "Well, because I'm agnostic."
Mm.
And I'm totally oblivious. I had no idea what that meant. And I
Yeah.
said, "Well, I was raised mostly Methodist. What denomination is agnostic?" And he
Aw.
just looked at me and he goes, "It means I'm not sure that there's a God." And I
Right.
said, "Oh," I said, "Well, there is." And he
Yeah.
said, "Well, according to you, I don't get to see him." And I said, "Why?" And he goes,
Wow.
"Well, I'm Jewish." And I said, "So was Jesus."
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, why would you pick somebody like me, God? Because I haven't read all the way through the Bible. I'm not a
Yeah.
theologian. I don't understand.
Right.
But what it comes down to is what I do understand is who I met.
Yep.
And I said, "Alan, if I paid your house off for you and you never thanked me, would your house not be paid off any longer?" And
Wow.
I know that not everybody agrees with that, and that's
Sure.
okay. But I believe that Jesus did what he said he did, and he paid the price for us all.
Mm.
That's where I differ with some of my friends
Sure.
is
Sure.
the God I met is just so much bigger than I think the conditions we put on him here.
Mm.
I won't go any further than that because
Right.
I'll start a lot of debate. I will just say that I've become affirming
Yeah.
of humans
Yeah.
and less controlled by rigid laws and rules.
Right.
And I'm just more affirming of
Yeah.
the human experience.
Yeah.
So,
There's a lot of hurt out there. There's a lot of people that have experienced a lot of terrible things in the name
mm-hmm.
of especially Christianity.
Right.
And when you hear that phrase, taking the Lord's name in vain, I don't think about stubbing your toe and saying Jesus. I think about the people that say that they follow Jesus, but
Mm-hmm.
then live contrary.
Right.
You're taking on that name and giving it a different
Mm-hmm.
nature than what it
Yeah.
really means.
And we all have to struggle with that, as
Yeah.
a Christian. Like I talked last night about how even after I knew him, I still had failed, and there was
Yeah.
still times that I've hurt people.
Right.
The difference is that I feel like we have to recognize that quicker. We have to
Yeah.
be retrospective quicker,
Yeah.
and we have to come to apologize, quicker.
Mm.
But I mean, God showed me that I was being very unfair to the people in the church, and
Yeah.
I was very judgmental
Right.
of them. And so, I don't know.
Wow.
I still
That's
have a lot to learn.
beautiful.
But
We all do.
I know that ultimately, I said, my sister-in-law, I love her. She's her saying, and it's become our family saying, is the best is yet to come.
Yeah.
And so even after some horrendous loss that she suffered, she would still look at me and say, the best is yet to come. And so that's just kind of become our mantra. And so that's what I tell people. He loves you more than you'll ever know.
Yeah.
He's bigger than we can ever imagine.
Yeah.
He's got it.
Yeah.
So just love God and love
Yeah.
others.
I couldn't say it better myself. You are just tremendous, Crystal. I want to
Well,
thank you
thanks.
so
Yeah,
much for
thank
coming
you. I
on.
appreciate it.
Before we go, would you mind just praying for us, praying for the people watching and myself and just anyone
Sure.
that's watching? Maybe they're questioning, maybe they're all in, but if you could just pray for us, I'd greatly
Sure.
appreciate that.
Sure, absolutely.
Thanks.
Father God, I just thank you so much for this opportunity. I thank you for opening Brett's heart to just want to share the story, Lord, with anybody that is listening. And I thank you for the opportunity for them to hear just about your goodness and more than anything, to hear about your reality.
Yeah.
That it is so hard as a human sometimes because we can't tangibly hear or feel, but that we're reminded that you're always there in the midst of the darkness, in the midst of the pain. We know that you, as you've said, that you do not cause it, but that you will use it. And so, Father, we just ask those that are questioning, that are doubting, that they just tangibly feel you wrap around them, that they feel that love that you have for them, and that they know that you are a safe place, no matter who they are, no matter where they've been, no matter what the world has told them, that you are a safe place for them. And we love you, God, and we just thank you for this opportunity. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And one more quick question. You said when you had the experience, you said you looked at the floor of heaven and it looked like there were like golden diamonds, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a scripture. There's this. So then I want to say it's in Revelation. Somebody found it for me once, but it talks about like something about like a sea of transparent glass. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that was it. Yeah, that was what I saw. So
wow.
Anyway,
Beautiful.
And it's so neat. If the people watching or listening, if you haven't read other stories, well, one, I would love if you would read Waking Up in Heaven and Chasing Heaven. That would be awesome.
I was just gonna say, yeah.
But also, I have a good friend, Mary Neal. She was she is a spinal surgeon who wrote the book To Heaven and Back. She died in a kayaking accident.
Wow.
And so she shares her experience. And also for those of you who have lost a child, she walks through that experience in her book. Don Piper wrote the book 90 Minutes in Heaven. He was a pastor. So you have a teacher and a mom, you have a doctor. Don Piper was a pastor. 𝗖𝗿𝘆𝘀𝗻 was a child. I'm trying to think of some other ones. There's so many. John Burke is the pastor of Gateway Church in Austin, Texas, and he wrote the bestseller Imagine Heaven, where he shares 30 years worth of research, and he's a pastor who was skeptical of why are people coming out and saying this kind of stuff? Does it contradict scripture? And in his 30 years of study, he became affirming of our stories and that they are scripturally based and that there was too many things that matched, right?
Yeah.
And so his book is amazing, and his wife, Kathy Burke, wrote the devotional that goes with it. So those are my top recommendations.
Wow. I just want to say again, too, your first book, Waking Up in Heaven, which is the one I read, is just tremendous. And you just wrote another one. How long ago? Chasing Heaven.
A few years ago, Chasing Heaven. And that's kind of the after story, but I feel like there's just as much God in that one.
Sure.
And I feel like Chasing Heaven is more relatable because it's not all about, well, you died and went to heaven. You know, we don't all get that experience, but we all do get a life experience.
Yeah.
And so it's more about how are we going to use this life experience that God's given us.
That's awesome. I'm about to order it, so I'm excited. Yeah. Thank you, Crystal.
Well, we'll have to talk again after you read that one.
Let's do it, okay?
Okay. All right, Brett. Bye-bye.
You.
Thanks
Bye.
for having me.
Bye.